All right, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Today, I think I'm going to be talking about philosophy, as I have just finished learning about philosophy for the first time ever in an academic environment. So today, I would like to go over kind of the views that I've formed from the knowledge that I've gained from this class, and my kind of philosophy of the world. Now, I'd just like to premise before I demonstrate all of these strong ideas, if you want to call it that I do appreciate the fact that I still have a lot to learn, and I'm saying right now that like all of these opinions I'm going to demonstrate could definitely change. I think that I would call myself like a student of the universe, so to speak, where I'm here to learn and understand everything around me, and I'm definitely willing to change. These are just the ideas and thoughts that resonate with me the most right now. So, in this class, I learned three kind of branches of philosophy, which were metaphysics, ethics, and the philosophy of science. So, through these subjects, my opinions have kind of developed towards the fact that humanity is kind of inevitably doomed, and that humanity is just constantly going through the same circular process, and they're dedicating themselves to basically one thing, which is reproducing. And I think that we're kind of just carbon sinks going in a meaningless, constant circular motion without any purpose of ourselves. And we're just so used to doing it that nobody thinks that, nobody questions it. Nobody questions the status quo. We just keep going through a circular motion. And today I'd kind of like to explain through, metaphysics, ethics, and the philosophy of science how humanity is this way, and how these subjects kind of align with the ideology that I've collected over the course of this class. So as we talk about metaphysics, I think it's most important for me to lay out the fact that logic is the most important thing to me. If I'm going to believe in something, it has to be definitive. I prefer not to have faith in something because it's kind of anticlimactic in the fact that it's not 100% true, So if I'm going to pursue something as the truth, it should actually be true. So for me to believe in something, it really has to be almost empirical. So through what I just said about logic and almost empiricism, I don't believe in God because there is no empirical proof of God. Therefore, there is no decision. There is no actual reason for me to believe that He exists. And through this, in the same way, there's no empirical proof that God doesn't exist. So through that, I'm an agnostic, and I think that as of now, we do not have a way of proving that God exists. We can have our faith and feel, but if there were an actual deductive method of showing it, I think that everybody would agree with that. And if you see in the world, there are many different religions which contradict each other, and there's also things like atheism and agnosticism. So the fact that there's such a wide variety of beliefs shows to me that one belief isn't concrete true, right? So one of the largest arguments for the sake of God is the cosmological argument, and I touched over this previously in this subject, but just to sum it up quickly here, because really what I'm trying to do in this podcast is just briefly summarize all the ideas that I've had over this class to get to one conclusion. So the idea of the cosmological argument states that the universe must have an uncaused cause, and then they inductively say that this uncaused cause has to be God. But if you look at the logic of the argument, there's nothing there that definitively shows that the uncaused cause can be God instead of the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory was a singularity that started the universe, and the universe is the four dimensions of the three dimensions that we see, and the fourth dimension being time. Therefore, there can't be anything before time if time has been created, which shows that the Big Bang Theory can be an uncaused cause. So, although there is not like a deductive argument for atheism, the Bible has been disproven already throughout the history of humanity, such as with Galileo. The Bible used to say that the sun was the center of the universe, and it's not. But we'll touch on that later in the philosophy side. But as throughout the history of humanity, science has progressed with time, and as science progresses, religion becomes less viable and less people believe in it. So I think that since science progresses with time, science is a function of time. I think that time can progress to the point where science progresses such that religion's almost obsolete. Although there's no deductive, really empirical evidence that God doesn't exist, the idea that God doesn't exist resonates with me the most. But as I said, I don't really want to go off of a belief of faith, so I'm like kind of in between an agnostic and an atheist in the metaphysical realm, because God not existing really makes sense to me, but there's no absolute way of showing that. So through metaphysics, I've discovered that I also believe in materialism. Um, I believe that humans are carbon sinks, and that they, just like any other organism, are going through the carbon cycle. Um, as the same fact as everything else, there's no concrete or empirical evidence of spirituality, but that idea also doesn't resonate with me, you know? The idea of materialism makes perfect sense to me, and I think that we really are just carbon sinks, you know, same thing as a tree, same thing as a mouse, and we're just going through the cycle just as life does. And because of that, I think that we're extremely naive, or we're naive to think that we're more special or meaningful than any other organism, you know? The idea that we have all of these life forms in our world, and we think that a god cares the most about humans. I mean, if you look on a universal level, there's this entire universe created, and there's this small pale blue dot, and then even smaller little creatures on that are, you know, the most important thing in the universe. That just doesn't really make sense to me. And I think that if there is a higher power, it would make total sense for the higher power to have all of the life forms on Earth as their children, not just humans. I think that shows kind of a gap in religion too. So I think that pretty much covers metaphysics. I lie between agnosticism and atheism, and I believe in materialism. And metaphysics through the ideas of God has kind of showed me that humanity's, with the materialistic point of view, that humanity are carbon sinks going through a circular motion like how any other carbon sink does. This materialistic ideology plays right into the same thing with ethics. So as I discuss ethics, the fact that I believe in this materialistic point of view, the fact that humans are carbon sinks going through a meaningless cycle, I have a nihilistic perspective on the world. I don't think that humans matter on a universal level, and I think that humans overvalue the meaning. The fact that humans overvalue their meaning leads to my next point, however, and that although life is ultimately meaningless because we're just going through these circular motions and we don't really impact the entire universe, we can still give our own meaning. So this is why I align myself with an optimistic nihilistic point of view. Although I think that life is ultimately meaningless, I think that I can still optimize the time that I have and enjoy my life to the absolute fullest. So although ultimately nothing's gonna matter, that doesn't mean that I should sit in the corner of my room and sulk for the life that I have. I might as well make myself happy and do things while I have time. So this kind of leads to my overall ethical ideology, which actually doesn't have a name that I'm aware of. It's not an ideology that we discuss in class. It's kind of like a mix. So it kind of aligns with hedonism, but not fully. I think that because we have this time that we have this time on Earth and it's ultimately not gonna have any meaning, we might as well optimize it. So we really should do whatever we crave, fulfill our cravings before we die. However, I think that although we are meaningless, we are equally meaningless, as sad as that sounds. So I don't think that I'm more meaningful than any other organism on the earth. So I don't think that anybody really, but it applies to myself as too. I think that everybody should be following their cravings, but I don't think that they should follow their cravings at the expense of others. That's why it doesn't fully align with hedonism, because I wouldn't do anything just because I felt like it. I still value the others around me. So with that, that basically explains my opinion on ethics. I think that everybody is equal. Nobody is more important than anybody else, and nobody should do anything at the expense of anybody else, just for their own benefit. But I do think that in general, people should follow their cravings is usually the word, but just what they want to do and what would make them the most happy in life. That seems the most intuitive to me and seems to make the most sense, so that they can optimize the short amount of time that they have on the earth in reality. And with that, I'd like to go over the philosophy of science and my ideologies pertaining to the philosophy of science. So I think that science is able to explain why humanity really doesn't matter. I think that science relates a lot to my metaphysical ideologies. I think that science is the best route to answering as I said before, so to speak, big questions of the universe. So like, who am I? Why am I here? Because also, as I discussed previously when I was talking about metaphysics, is as time progresses, science progresses. And like 100 years ago, science was able to answer questions that we would never we would never imagine being able to answer. So I think in a long time from now, science theoretically should be able to answer anything, including all of those big questions. Obviously, before I talked about too is I align my ideologies with empiricism. I think that in order for me to believe something, it should be empirically true. And just as I said with everything else too, like, deduction is the most logical process. I think science also, there are studies so many studies that have been done that show that love is the strongest chemical reaction, and how we're rooted back to how humanity was before, when we were just animals, really, like our primal descendants, and how they just need to reproduce, right? So you would mate to reproduce. That was like the sole meaning of any species. And I think with the studies that I said, like, love is the strongest chemical reaction, this still pertains to us. So basically, just like any other animal, really all we're here for is to just reproduce, so then others can reproduce again. And I think that shows what I was saying, is how life is objectively meaningless if we don't have any really, as of now, any impact on the rest of the universe. And if you look around, basically everybody that you see is dedicating themselves to love, to this chemical reaction, and the only reason that this is so strong is so that we can reproduce just like any other animal. And I think this is a very depressing thought, but I think it's a very true thought. So with those three ideologies I've talked about now, as that's all I had to say for the philosophy of science, is these three units that I've dived into have shown me that life is pretty meaningless, because humans are just going through the same cycle as any other carbon sink would. And the biggest aspect of this cycle is just to reproduce, because we are animals like anything else. And most humans just dedicate the vast majority of their lives to this chemical reaction just so they can reproduce. So that's what I've really learned this year. Obviously, I've learned a lot more than that, but through what I've already spoken about, I've come to that conclusion. Thank you for listening. I'll see you guys next week.